What's up guys, Aaron Miles with OnTilt Gaming here, going to be bringing you a video about Ayu, Lunar Swordswoman, and Ayu, Shaman Swordswoman. So this is a card that is, it's a new ruler from Advent of the Demon King that's kind of taken the interest of a lot of the players based on its, unique singleton flavor of style of deck. And then we found out that it also has a bit of competitive viability. It won, the ARG in Florida. Me and Alex Blandon split at 2K, both playing the ruler and playing very different styles of the deck. So I'm going to talk today a bit about what this ruler does, where I think it's going, the different play styles of it, and things like that. Just kind of a general overall overview of Ayu. So first things first, we're going to read this card together, because a lot of misunderstandings along decks come from just not fully understanding what a card does. So I'm going to make sure that nothing is left to your imagination, and we all know exactly what this thing does. So, first off, it is a Were-Rabbit, which is relevant, because races on your ruler definitely matter sometimes. And it judgments for 1 blue and 1. And then it's energized blue. At the beginning of the game, you draw a card. You may not have more than one copy of a card in your deck. So in card games, text of a card overwrites the rules of the game, which means that the rules of the game say you can play 4 of a card. Croco Shark says you can play any number of this card. Ayu, however, is also a card text that says you can only play 1 of this card, and that supersedes that. Restrictions on cards overwrite things that override restrictions that are not specifically overriding that restriction. And what that basically means is that you can only play 1 Croco Shark in your Ayu deck. You can only play 1 12 Kimono in your Croco Shark deck. In your Ayu deck. Don't play 12 Kimonos in your Croco Shark deck either. And then on the J-Roller side, she is a 10/10 with Imperishable, still a Were-Rabbit. And when this card enters your field, search your deck for a Soul Resonator, reveal it, and add it to your hand. Then shuffle your deck. And of course, discard a Soul Resonator. That is not once per turn. This card gains +5/+5 flying and first strike until end of turn, so as we all know, 0 mana instant speed abilities on J-Rulers are always fair and balanced, much like that one. And then God's Art, once in a lifetime, 0. It doesn't have the reminder text that this is once per game, however, this is once per game. It is a God's Art. God's Arts are once per game. That is how Force of Will works. So you name a card, and you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you reveal the named card. Add that card to your hand and remove the rest from the game. So generally when you God's Art, you want to end the game. Don't throw this away on stupid shit. Don't do this to win a counter war so that your World of Madness or your Sylvia sticks. Use that to win the game, or not lose the game, depending on the kind of situation that you're in. But, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to go, oh, if I had this card, I win, and then you get that card and you win. So now we're going to look at some of the cards that go along with Ayu. First off, we're going to look at the Soul Resonators. So first we have Lowly Bug Spirit. When this card enters your field, draw a card, and it has Swiftness, not a terrible card on its own right. Then we have, I'm going to skip over Misty real quick, and then Sleepy Cat Spirit. It's just a 4/6 with Barrier, nothing special. Soaring Falcon Spirit, once again, nothing special. 4 mana, 8/8 flyer. When it attacks, you rest a Resonator, not super relevant. Then Grieving Elf Spirit, when it's put into the field, you get a Soul Resonator that isn't Grieving Elf Spirit from your graveyard to your hand, so it just is a second copy of any of your souls in an Ayu deck. And then we have the main 3, Misty, Valera Tiger Spirit, and Willful Samurai Spirit. These are the ones that give simple skills and, do something special if you're just playing Ayu. Misty on her own right is a very good card. It's basically an unkillable card because it can just flicker out of any removal spell. Dawn of the Earth and Final Battle are like the only ways to kill it. And even Dawn of the Earth, you might have to bait them into, removing it first somehow, so not a super great way to deal with it forever. But if you're playing Ayu, then you get to pump your Misty. For 1 mana, you just give her +1/+1, and when she's discarded, you gotta give something flying. Sure, Ayu already gives herself flying when you discard a soul, but maybe you have like a Sylvia or something on field next to it, and you want to give that flying as well. So, that's Misty. She's probably one of the better cards of the deck, probably one of the best cards in the set, to be honest, and the ability to make her even better by being able to pump her is just insane. And then Valera's Tiger Spirit and Willful Samurai Spirit, they both cost 1 less if your ruler is Ayu, which is actually pretty good. A 4 mana 12/12 with Precision is nothing to sneeze at. Likewise, a 3 mana 10/8 with Pierce is nothing to sneeze at. And Pierce is a symbol skill that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And the fact that it's now in this deck as like a free pump spell for your ruler to give it Pierce is actually kind of insane. And then we're going to move on to the Ayu cards. So first off, we have Ayu Special Power Medicine. Gives you J-Ruler +2/+2, and whenever Ayu enters the field, you call a stone, which is huge. I don't know how many of you were playing in Bahamut format, but if you remember Melgus and you would like tap your Levitine, give Melgus Imperishable, flip him, get a stone, it felt amazing. This feels exactly the same way. And I do like that they did, restrict it to Ayu, because if other rulers could do this, this card would be absolutely bonkers. Ayu's Sword Strike, you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. As long as none of them have the same name, then you get to kill a creature. 1 mana kill spell is always great. It's nice to have more of those in a singleton deck. Heteroclite Excalibur is good, but you only get 1 of it. And then Ayu's Pictorial Scroll. This card's actually really mediocre in an Ayu deck. It lets you put in a 5-drop Resonator off the top of your deck if you're Ayu a 3-drop otherwise, so obviously not very good in other decks. Although it is a treasury item, so keep that in mind if you're trying to play Kaguya 4 and you just want this to draw a card, then sit on the field as a treasury item for you to tap. However, as you're going to see in a second here when we look at these Ayu lists for the most part don't run a whole lot of Resonators, and that might change in the future, but that's actually something that I don't think will. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at a couple of Ayu decks. First we have up Stuart McGirt's ARG Florida Ayu Burn deck, and then next to it we have a Ayu Control deck that I've been playing that I played at New York 2K. So first we're going to talk about Stuart's deck, why it was successful. First off, nobody knew what the fuck it did. Nobody was really prepared to be playing Fogs and Melfies and things like that because Red-Green Fire had been the aggro deck before that, and Fogs were not super effective against that kind of deck. It ran a lot of counter spells, it could just call a stone if you fogged it before untap to avoid the counter spells, and Mariabella was like a huge thing. Like, that would just sit on the field, it would counter your Fogs, it would just ramp up the more the game went on, and that wasn't really something you could afford to do. Melfi also couldn't target Fair or an Elf because of the barrier counters, potentially. So those cards just weren't very good against it, and people weren't really running that coming into this. Sure, Tree probably sided Fogs, maybe it played Melfies in the main, but it wasn't really like mulliganing for those in Game 1 looking at Ayu. Like, you see an Ayu flip over and you have no idea how to mulligan against that, right? And I don't think that this is a deck that you can necessarily count out just because you know how to mulligan against, now how to build against it, and things like that. So what are the advantages of this? First off, Possession Stone. That's a card that, if that didn't exist, Ayu wouldn't be able to play. However, now you're looking at an aggro deck that plays 5 white sources, 6 red sources, 7 blue sources, 7 black sources, and 7 green sources. Which is it's like a pretty consistent mana base. Like, it's not a whole lot of white, but he only runs 3 white cards. None of them are like super pivotal to winning the game. The cards that he's probably going to God's Art for most often is going to be, I would assume, Sprinting Flame Horse. I've like played with the deck a little bit. I God's Art for Flame Horse like 90% of the time. Actually 100% of the time. But so it's like an aggro deck, right? And then you get to run things like Scorn of Dark Alice and Nameless Mist, which is something that you haven't had to worry about when playing against aggro decks before. Because it's locked in that singleton, it's got that singleton restriction on it, but it's also a 5-color deck. It just gets a lot more versatility than other aggro decks. And he didn't even run things like Sylvia or Freyla, other Swiftness Resonators. It was really just all in on Ayu, and I think when you look at the deck going forward, you're probably going to see a little more of a split on Swiftness Resonators, so that you're not such like a singular threat to get blocked out by like a Melfi. You know, you can kind of split your damage so that you really only have to worry about Fog. You'll probably move like Fair Spell to the main to deal with some things like that. Probably move Final Breeze to the main deck as well. Probably put in, a few more burn spells, things like that. But I definitely don't think this is a deck that you can count out just because you know what it does now. Fog effects, for the most part, have always actually been a pretty ineffective way of dealing with aggro, because first off, you have to draw them. There's really no way to search them, and Ayu pretty consistently is going to flip on like turn 3 and get a Flame Horse and try and kill you. Or even just like not get the Flame Horse pass, play like 3 mana worth of pump spells and then try and kill you. And like God's Art for a Fire spell if they need to. So it's, you're not going to automatically beat this deck because you're playing 4 Fogs. And even if you are, then like they can play around it, right? But I'll get into that a little bit more later. So then we look at Ayu Control. This kind of just takes the good kill spells and control cards from like every color and throws them into one deck. The mana base is pretty consistent because you are mostly locked into 3 colors. However, then you get like Priscia's Leap as a win condition, which is something that's cool. If your opponent never taps out, you just get a kill with that. And then like you're a blue, black, green control deck that also gets to run like Dawn of the Earth, Fog, Butterfly. Some of these more powerful white cards, World of Madness, things that you didn't want to play white to play before, because like white really only gives you a few good cards. So once again, having a 5-color stone in the format to be able to splash things like that is insane for us. World of Madness in Ruler's Memoria format was like really good. Because you didn't want to play white, but you wanted to play World of Madness, and once again you get to do things like that. And then, if there's one thing I noticed playing the Ayu control deck is that discard is not as effective against this as I thought it would be. So, you look at a singleton deck and you go, okay, discard is good, because they only get 1 copy of each card. If I can take that 1 copy out of their deck, or out of their hand, then I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the game. However, Ayu just generates so much natural advantage. It draws a card at the start of the game, it searches any soul when it flips, so it's actually very difficult for you to try and play a 1-for-1 game against them, which is what discard spells do. So that's just a very ineffective strategy. Counter spells, like Otherworld Dreams, it's a 1-for-1 card, and you can't 1-for-1 against Ayu, they're just going to bury you an advantage. The other thing is that control decks really struggle against any form of Ayu. Even the aggro deck, if it wanted to, could just eventually put down a Misty And that's a card that you can really only kill with Final Battle or, you know, force a removal spell on and then play Dawn of the Earth. And that's just very, very difficult for anything that's not Tree to deal with. And Tree, yeah, like you can Final Battle it one time. You're probably gonna have to pay 2,000 life to like kill that and the Ayu, and then because you know Misty can pump it if you're in an Ayu deck, so you have to play around that as well. And then they can just like search a Grieving Elf Spirit and get it back. So really, there's just too much natural advantage coming out of the ruler herself in order for Control to really combat either of these lists. Which brings me to my next point, is that I think Ayu's place in the meta is beating other decks of her type. Ayu Control will always beat every other Control deck. Ayu Aggro will beat every other Aggro deck. And Ayu Aggro will beat every other Aggro deck because it can either kill your singular threat. If you're playing Red-Green Fire, this can target attack down your Fire. If you're not playing Red-Green Fire, this probably just outraces you. Like if you're playing Lumia or something like this will most likely outrace you. Because it's got flying, and aggro decks don't really run flyers anymore. And even if you run something like a Divine Bird of Ataractia to, you know, chump block the Ayu, they have something with Pierce now. We haven't seen Pierce in an aggro deck in forever. And blue rulers as a whole have always been very overstated. Flute was a 1 mana 7/8, Val 2 was a 2 mana 14/14, and Ayu is a 2 mana 10/10. And the drawback on that was always that they were fucking blue cards. You have to run blue rulers. Possession Stone makes it so that that's not the case anymore. You know, we're both running, I'm running like 4 blue stones, Stuart's running 3 blue stones, and then we gotta play 5 color decks. And the fact that our ruler is blue is mostly irrelevant, because there are some good blue cards, but I don't want to be base blue, and Ayu makes it so that you don't have to be base blue. You get the overstated value of a blue ruler, and, you know, that's really the end of that point. And then, she's got Imperishable naturally. There is one card in the game that you can put in your main deck that takes away Imperishable, and that's Burn to Cinders, and that's double red, and red fucking blows if you're not playing aggro. So like, let's say you're playing Tree, which is like the big control deck of the format. It's probably the thing that is most likely to run both Amalgarasu's Foresight and Melfi, trying to, you know, stall out this OTK version. You really can't afford to run green, black, white, red, and consistently hit red to Burn to Cinders at a reasonable pace because it's double red, as well as potentially have white for a fog if you need to stall to draw the Burn to Cinders, as well as have green and black mana to just function as a deck. So I don't think Tree is going to be able to compete with any version of Ayu. I know it's what I played against the most when I was playing Control, and it was just a cakewalk. Like they play all these 1-for-1 things. Tree is a deck that has always had a bit of a hard time naturally maintaining advantage. And you just kind of bury them under the amount of souls that you can search, the imperishableness of your J-Ruler just constantly hitting them, as well as having effective removal for their Rezzard or their Arlet that they pull out to try and block once you've, you know, racked them up to a number of cards in exile. And yeah, that's really it. There's not a whole lot more to say about Ayu. I don't know if this is the kind of thing I would take to a GP. It's really matchup dependent. And, you know, being a singleton deck, yeah, it's a pretty consistent deck because you really only need a couple of cards to win the game, and you can God's Art for one of them. Like in the Ayu control deck, the only cards I ever really cared about seeing were Misty and Pricia's Leap, and I can just search the Misty on flip and God's Art for Pricia's Leap. In the aggro deck, you have so many cards that do the same thing as other cards that you don't really have any like combo pieces. Like you just want to draw souls, and you run 7 of them, and you don't care which ones you draw. You just want to draw one of them. So the deck is actually a lot more consistent than it should be, just because we have so many cards that effectively do the same thing. But this is a ruler that I will say is very matchup dependent. However, you can kind of get around that by the fact that 2 versions of the deck exist and you have to mulligan against them very differently. If you are playing at a GP and your opponent flips Ayu, you are probably inclined to mulligan like it's the aggro version, because that's the one that will beat you more quickly. Duh. And what I really mean by that is that if you mulligan improperly against control, you still have a chance to get back in the game. If you mulligan improperly against aggro, you're just dead. But Ayu control can just play so aggressively, like they can still just flip their ruler on turn 2. They'll have a 10/10 imperishable that you probably can't deal with, and then they can just discard souls to, you know, fly over you. So overall, I think Ayu is like a really fun ruler. I don't know how competitively viable she's going to stay. I know a lot of the pro players are really split on her. Like some of us think she's absolutely garbage. We have no idea how this is working. Other of us see a bit of potential in it, but you know, only time will tell. That's all for me for now. This is Aaron Miles for OnTilt Gaming. Merry Christmas, everybody.